So this afternoon we're talking about the food and beverage industry. So one of the world's most important sectors. I mean, every country has one, and it's obviously we all eat. So it's an industry that we're all involved in. It's also relating to our discussions this morning, quite sensitive politically. Yeah, so food and beverage, it's often the source of many trade restrictions. Local products can be quite an emotive kind of topic. There's a lot of controversial policy making around the food and beverage sector. On one hand, it's a very simple sector, so growing food and then eating it. On the other hand, the sector is more and more international. There are elements in which digital is becoming involved. And food security is also a very big policy trend which both national governments and also multilateral organisations are worried more and more about. So to discuss some of the trends that are happening in food and beverage, and particularly on the digital future and how that's going to have an impact, I'm pleased to welcome five speakers. So we have Brett Rierson, who's the head of Global Post-Harvest Knowledge and Operations Centre at the World Food Programme. We have Joachim Yebouet, who's the CEO of East African Tiger Brands Industries. We have Reid Paquin, who's Industry Solutions Director at GE Digital. Hemrich, who's the Deputy Director of Nutrition and Food Systems at the Food and Agriculture Organisation. And Navas Meeran, who's the Chairman of Eastern Condiments, a food manufacturing firm based in India. Please welcome the panel to this session. So if I can just begin, Gunther, with you. So, I mean, your perspective from the Food and Agriculture Organisation, obviously you're taking a global perspective and thinking about food systems globally. If you were going to pick out 3 or 4 things that you think are the key trends that we should all be watching in the food and beverage sector for the next 10 years, what would you pick out?
I think it's important to first look at the global population trends and the trends in urbanization. We will reach a population of about 10 billion by the year 2050. That means at the moment we are adding every year 80 million people that are additional eaters. That means 10 United Arab Emirates every year are added. Now these people in the future will eat quite differently from how many people eat today. They will eat relative to grains, they will eat relatively more meat, they will eat more fish, they will eat more fruits, more vegetables. They will also eat more processed food, they will eat more packaged food, they will eat more ready-prepared foods. These are huge opportunities for the business world, but it also has major challenges. And I want to touch just a few of these challenges. I think one of the challenges about food security and nutrition, the food security problems in the world are not over, they're not resolved. There's still 700 million people suffering under nutrition. And at the same time, other groups of malnutrition are growing. There's 2 billion people that lack essential micronutrients in their diets. And there is already 600 million people obese, and the obesity trend is going up. Actually, the global burden of malnutrition of all these reforms adds up to 1 in 3 people of the global population. And any action in the food system needs to look at these problems. A second issue is that these changes in the food supply chains and the way we eat, they have a major ecological footprint. And basically, innovations need to take into account how our food chains are changing. They get longer, and we need to look at water scarcity, and other environmental constraints, planetary boundaries. And the third issue is that in much of the developing world, the agricultural sector is still, in terms of people working in it, 50–60% of the population. So what we have ahead of us is a huge transformation, a huge economic transformation. By the time these countries have reached more balance between the people that actually work in agriculture and the contribution that the sector makes to economic development, will be a major shift. That means we need to create a transformation process that in the next 20 years will add 600 million jobs. And to do this well needs, I think, a concerted effort of all actors, public, private, civil society. I leave it at that, I think, for the introduction.
And do you have any thoughts about manufacturing in particular? So some of the trends you spoke about at the beginning, like more people getting more affluent, more people eating processed foods, the composition of diets changing. What are the implications of those for people in the manufacturing sector?
I think if you look at UAE, it's not a very typical country because in terms of its food sector, because a lot of the food is imported. But if you look, let's say, at an African country, we can see that the agriculture sector, the agro-industry sector, actually is still up to 50% of the manufacturing sector in these countries. So actually, it's the food industry that is the first step towards agricultural transformation, as has a major role to play in getting this transformation right.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Reid, if I could come on to you next. So you work at GE Digital, right? So this is not perhaps a company or a division that we might think of in relation to the food and beverage sector. So what's digital got to do with farming and food?
Right. What does a jet turbine have to do with a food and beverage manufacturer? We do a lot of work. You mentioned the manufacturing side. So yeah. Working with manufacturers to deal with all the issues they face today. Gunther just mentioned some of those high-level ones. Within manufacturing, it's all about achieving the outcomes they're going after. And I would bucket in 3 primary areas for a food beverage manufacturer. Quality, making sure that the products you put out there are of high quality and aren't harming your consumers. Sustainability, so reducing energy, water, wastewater costs, and being more friendly to the environment. And then the final piece is productivity. Either getting more out with the same or cutting resources, cutting out costs, and getting the same amount out. So GE Digital focuses on providing those digital tools, automation, software, even digital twins now within food and beverage manufacturers to start achieving the goals around those 3 outcomes that I mentioned.
Mm-hmm. And if you were a manufacturer, a food manufacturer today, what are the sort of investments that people are not thinking about that they should be thinking about for the next 10 years?
Well, I mean, I guess it all depends on where you are as a manufacturer. If you're still using paper-based or spreadsheet processes, focus first on automating those, going to an MES software. But some of the more advanced companies that we're talking to, or at least the ones that are most forward-looking, are looking towards, I mentioned before, digital twins. So how can they build digital twins?
What is a digital twin?
A good question. So essentially you can think of it as a virtual representation of an asset or a process. So just a pilot that we're doing with a global beverage manufacturer. If you think of a beverage line, the 2 assets that they've identified with us as bottlenecks are the filler, so the piece that fills up a bottle of, they produce soft drinks, and then the labeler, so the part that wraps the label around the bottle. So what we're doing is we're building a digital model of those 2 assets so that we can use historical and real-time data to predict the outcomes for them. It's decreasing downtime and increasing throughput for those 2 assets.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Joachim, if we can come on to you. A few people have already mentioned sort of Africa and the big role that agriculture plays in Africa. So, I mean, you're involved in running a food and beverage manufacturing sector in Africa. What are the key topics on your agenda at the moment, particularly when you think about the future and how you need to get ready for it?
Yeah. Let me start by quoting what His Excellency the Minister of UAE said this morning. He asked a question. He said, what do you want to achieve? What do you want to achieve with all this disruption technology, all these changes in manufacturing? Do you only want to achieve economic growth for the numbers, or do you want to achieve happiness for your people? And this is where we are aligned. We want to add value to life. In our countries, if you take Ethiopia, where I'm operating today, you have 100 million people. Africa overall is about 1.2 billion people. And we like it or not, this is 80 to 90% low-income population. And you, as much as you can pose an act that will impact on their life, you are the winner of tomorrow. How to do this? African economies for the past years, decades, has been driven by agriculture. Agriculture, basic agriculture, raising crops, which today is moving towards manufacturing. I will even say food manufacturing. And what is calling that? Major changes are happening through stability that has gone through several countries. In the past decade, you have got growth coming into countries. Ethiopia, for instance, has got double-digit growth for the past 10 years, which is important. Countries from east to west, Cote d'Ivoire, Senegal, Uganda, Kenya, are going through phenomenal growth. This translates into creation of a new middle class. This translates into more education, increase in purchase power, improve in, important to say, gender employment. And remember that food supply in Africa has been for many years organized again the mother. With the improvement in gender employment, the mother is becoming less and less available. We have highly educated household. So then the mother is not available anymore to taking care of that food supplies. Hence, the provision of the food under a package form. Hence, food manufacturing. That food manufacturing, you have to again understand which type of food you want to provide to that mother for her family. You have to understand, first of all, that mother understand what we call the consumer in our jargon. How do you do that? Simply by observing what is in the dish of the mommy. And usually it is basic. Go back to the basic. You have staple food, rice, cassava, spaghetti, pasta. You have the meat, you have the gravy, and you have the seasoning. Then take that through innovation. And when you take it through innovation, you translate that into a food manufacturing process that then start by adding value. The first stage is to provide that packaged food to the consumer. Second stage is creation of employment. A sizable factory in that part of the world is 1,000 people. 1,000 people, 1,000 direct employees. If you add the contractors and the SMEs around, this is 100,000 people that you are feeding. And you add value to their life, creating employment, developing the communities by assisting in assisting schools and hospitals, and then assisting our consumers and their family to improve their lifestyles of every day. This is what we translate into adding value to life and eat well and live well. This is our aspiration.
Okay, and what does that mean in practice? So, I mean, when you're deciding on, what products to produce or how to produce them, I mean, what are some actual practical decisions that you take to put your philosophy into action?
If I go back a little bit in the process, to support agriculture, our government has been favoring rural development for the past decades. Today, to promote manufacturing, there are policies put in place to attract investors. So the first stage is to attract investors coming in under the form of JV, for instance. What we have here in Ethiopia is a JV of a local company, East African Group, leading industrial and prominent employer, plus then Tiger Brand with an international South African company who come in with the know-how and both together put on the ground the plant. Of course, with facilities and tax incentive, etc., that given by the government. Then the plant, you start by recruiting people. Recruiting people in the communities around the factory. There are cities.
Okay, so you try and build a link between your factory and the local community.
And adding value to the people, not only your consumers, but the local communities.
And is that profitable, or is that just a nice thing to do?
Definitely, there are two aspects of that doing business. There is the commercial aspect, of course, where you create value for your shareholders. But that's not all. If that's all, you sell water and you are gone tomorrow. There is the societal aspect of doing business, which I will call more profitable. The societal aspect of doing business is to add value to life. When you get the smile in the face of someone in that part of the world, this is the first profit that you get from your processes.
Okay. I'm going to come to the other two panelists first, but just to remind you that we do have the chance for the audience to get involved and ask questions. So after the introductory remarks, I've got some questions that I can run through, but I'll prioritise things from the audience if you'd like to come in first. So do start thinking about anything you'd like to ask the panel, either someone in particular or just a general statement. So Brett, maybe if we come to you, so you work with the World Food Programme, and I know that you've had some involvement in technologies and thinking about how technologies can improve global food systems. Before we get on to the specific sort of examples, I mean, we've just heard from Joachim about Africa. So do you think digital is relevant for Africa, or is it just more about getting the basics of the food system right, and digital is something for the future?
I must say I found some of the presentations this morning a little bit depressing because it just showed me how big the gap is between and how fast the gap will expand. If I look at what the most pressing challenge is, and I would say I run a global center for the World Food Programme focused on post-harvest loss, which I would guess that, I mean, if I were to ask for a raise of hands, almost no one in the room would raise their hand and say that that was a big issue. But if you think about that population that we're talking about, 1.2 billion people, 80% of them are smallholder farmers.
So post-harvest loss, but that's about food being edible at the farm gate, but not actually reaching anyone's mouth.
So I think we talk about food waste in developed countries, and that's what happens when it's on the table and you throw it away. That's actually relatively minor compared to what happens in terms of food loss. And on average across Africa and actually Asia as well, farmers lose on average 30 to 40% of their harvest. So take out your wallet. Take out 30, 40%, not what's in it right now, but for the entire year. And there's very simple solutions to this. So for me, the technology that we look at is really basic. Something as simple as an airtight container that dried crops can go in that kills insects on their own CO2. Basic technology is something that I see as a more pressing need. But again, directly to your question in terms of the impact of digital, we look at, at the World Food Programme as a whole, the impact of digital in terms of how we register beneficiaries, even at the refugee level. So we do see the digitization and we do see value in some of the tools, but I would say it's much more on the service side where we're using biometrics to register either refugees or working, for example, in India with the state of Orissa, we pioneered a program to actually register beneficiaries of social programs and eliminated, I think it was about 25% of the costs were duplicate costs, where dead people were still receiving their benefits. So I think you do see a use of digitization in the humanitarian sphere. I'd love to see a digital duplicate for our logistics and supply chain. That would be fascinating to see. But I think that when we're looking at this in terms of manufacturing at the GMIS, post-harvest loss and this hermetic storage, this is a multi-billion-dollar business opportunity. There's 110 million smallholder farmers across sub-Saharan Africa. And what we found is as soon as the awareness is built.
So what's hermetic storage?
Hermetic storage, if I can ask you to help me out, everyone take a deep breath. Take a deep breath and hold your breath. Right? Whoever's the last man standing, the last woman standing wins. Okay? Effectively, hermetic storage is a airtight container that once you put dried crops in, insects suffocate on their own CO2. No additional chemicals, so it's an organic crop for your supply chains. And at least for us, for the World Food Programme, we were looking to buy from smallholder farmers. And the issues of quality became so grave that we actually couldn't buy from smallholders most of the time because of contamination of the crops, of aflatoxin contamination. And so relatively simple technologies, and again, the manufacturing for us, I go country to country to country looking for manufacturers who will take the specifications that we will give them and manufacture this. And in many cases, Uganda is an example, there's now, within 2 years of starting, there's hundreds of thousands of farmers who've all chosen to buy these hermetic storage silos or plastic hermetic bags. This is not, again, if you think of the World Food Program as humanitarian and giving away food to a refugee, this is completely different. I have a private sector background, mainly in venture capital and also in manufacturing. And so for me, I'm looking for manufacturers literally in every single country so we can have local manufacturing of these hermetic storage units.
Okay. And finally, if I can come on to Navas, so you run a manufacturing company in India, and I mean India's at the national level has got a very big industrialisation strategy at the moment. So the Prime Minister Narendra Modi, I mean, one of his policies that he's introduced since becoming Prime Minister is to the Make in India campaign. That's sort of his vision to follow the path that China took. Get factories into India, export manufacturing, give farmers jobs, and then therefore develop the country. Maybe, I mean, can you give us any perspective you've got on how that policy is going in general? And then maybe in particular for this session, what's the context for food and beverage?
Sure. In fact, as you rightly said, the Make in India movement is picking up. We have already, government has already announced around 8,000 crores, which is 1.2 billion US dollars for food processing industries. When you look at food processing industries, there's huge opportunity on one side. On the other side is that there's a mistrust on big brands globally, not just in India. So I think the movement is towards, instead of scaling up, we are slightly scaling out. So how do we take the advantage of scaling out? Scaling out basically comes up with collaborating with the farm level intervention with the farmers either through cooperatives or through NGOs. You can collaborate and you can come up with niche products that eventually will bring in employment, and then products specific to those areas. If you talk about organic products, everyone talks about organic product, but when you go to the shelf to buy something, the cost will be at least 2 to 3 times higher. So eventually what happens is there is no takers for, even if I produce organic product, there is no takers for that. So now it has come to a stage where we need to make sure that through collaborative farm level intervention, lot of value can be created on that particular line. So that is where the opportunity lies. As far as India is concerned, industrialization taking place in a big way. More people are moving on to cities. So we will eventually find it difficult to have workers in the farm. So the question lies in how we will increase the productivity. I mean, he said that the population is going to be 10 billion by 2050, and in case of India, we are at 1.23 billion. We also are marching very fast towards bigger numbers. So we need to try and find out solutions for increasing the productivity in the farms.
Sounds like it could be a real challenge for the food system. I mean, because India's food system is, in a global context, relatively informal at the moment. So a lot of small producers, a lot of small
Absolutely.
retailers.
That's true.
As those people move from, I guess, agricultural jobs into maybe formal sector jobs in cities, in factories or something, I mean, India's going to have to totally change its food supply system.
Yeah. See, what I feel is instead of addressing them as workers, when I say collaboration, you're trying to create entrepreneurs. So whoever becomes part of the overall story, become an entrepreneur. May not be in a big way, but he will be an entrepreneur. So the Make in India initiative is Make in India initiative and the startup initiative, which is there in the country as of now, it has created an ecosystem wherein a lot of people are thinking about entrepreneurs.
Okay. Let me just throw the floor open to the audience. Does anybody want to raise their hands and come in on something for one of the speakers, or a question about the food industry in general? Yep.
I used to work for John Deere way back then, and India was one of the places I visited. One of the challenges always, you can bring technology, but if you have a small farms, it doesn't work. It's too expensive.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering if having any kind of corporations or some sort of solutions to allow them to leverage technology for a larger number of people or farmers. Is that something India has explored?
I think if you have you worked in Punjab?
I visited, the factory was in Pune.
Right. So in Punjab, the cooperatives, they own the tractors, and it's being taken by farmers on a daily basis. It can be a weekly basis at that particular point of time. That's one thing. Second thing, even if you look at the post-harvest drying and all that stuff, there are also a collaborative initiatives done by the farmers. It's happening.
Anyone else like to come in on that one?
Yeah. I think if I look at my own past as a person, I grew up in a village with 100 farmers. By the time I finished my studies, there was one farmer in that village. So I have lived through that transformation with in my own history. And I can see many of the elements in terms of the grouping farmers together to give them access to technology is a key thing. But the private sector is actually not penetrating always to that level to facilitate that. So it's actually a joint role of public and private sectors to bring this kind of development forward. And I think the question that I have to the audience, if there's private sector companies, how can we move more actively? How can we move into a more concerted effort to both combine a private business agenda and a public development agenda? How can this be done? I think that is one of the key questions to address manufacturing and food industry development in a way that it also addresses the key challenges of employment, of environment, and of food and nutrition.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Great.
Yeah, I before moving to Uganda to take on this role for the World Food Program, I was the country director in China, and had been looking spent the last 2 decades actually mainly in Asia, for the most part in China. And I look at what happened from 1979 onwards in terms of the first wave with Deng Xiaoping was to increase agricultural productivity to free up workers so they could actually go to the Guangdong region, to go to these special economic zones to start manufacturing. But what I see when I'm in Africa, and again, country after country, is that the governments are being pulled in 2 different directions. Is that, for example, in Uganda, they look at this post-harvest work as a way to keep the youth on the farm, to keep them in the countryside, because there's a youth unemployment rate of about 60%. I don't know what it is in Ethiopia, but relatively high. And so there's actually the governments who say, yes, we want businesses. They're actually trying to keep the people out of the cities because they don't have the infrastructure to support it. Mm-hmm. So I see the China model, but I don't see that actually working within an African context. Maybe that's a good thing. It's been amazing what China has done, pulling 500 million people out of poverty in a relatively short period of time. But I don't see the same model being applied or applicable in an African context.
Okay.
If I can add a few words here, I may have a slight different view on it. We don't see any fear of, let's say, lack of resource to run either the farms of the operate or the manufacturing in the near future.
That's true.
One of the several initiatives put in place by the government is about education. Mm-hmm. And education will allow our manufacturing operations to have highly educated workers in the plants. So yes, farmers, agriculture will still be run by farmers. At the same time, boys and girls who have gone to many universities that have been put in place by the government policies will then take over of the manufacturing operations.
Okay.
So employment will still be balanced in both sectors, and both sectors will be complementary in the chain of providing foods to the consumer at the end.
Yeah. Okay. Some great perspectives there. We had a question down the front. Yeah.
Martin Chilcott from 2 Degrees. We work with a number of large food businesses like Unilever and Danone and Mars, and increasingly in recent years we've seen them getting heavily involved in what is clearly enlightened self-interest, developing the markets in which they're wanting to sell, or developing the supply chains in which they're sourcing. To what extent is that in common, more common, less common, with regional food players like yourselves? I'm thinking of Navas and Joachim. And are you exceptional in that respect, or is that normal?
Someone said again this morning, we cannot stay away of globalization. And in terms of supply chain processes, yes, of course, regional processes will be the drive of profitable processes tomorrow. How that operate? One of the key factors in trading between countries today is the free trade zones, is having the trade policies. If you take Africa, you have building blocks. You have SADC in the south, you have ECOWAS on the east, ECOWAS on the west, and COMESA on the east and the northern parts. We like it or not, resource available in Egypt can be complemented to resource available in Kenya. And via the regional sourcing, then you lower down the cost of the process, hence your return will be better definitely. So yes, Unilever, I understand, Tiger brand like we have today, and other companies, Nestle, definitely will have to buy into this process of regionalization to minimize the cost and making the goods available to the people where they live. Definitely.
Yeah. I'm fully agreeing with you. The point is, until such time it reaches the factory, it's a commodity. The moment it goes through the process and gets into your packet, it's your brand. So even if you doesn't have an adequate right level of supply chain up till the factory, you have a problem. Because end of the day, it's your brand that is going to suffer. That's the reason why companies like Industrialisation or Nestle, whoever it is, put that sort of effort. We put a lot of effort on contract farming. In India doesn't have a very strong contract farming mechanism. But still, in an informal way, we put a lot of effort just to see that the end product that reaches the customer should stick to certain so-called standards.
So we have time for another question from the audience. Yeah.
Nós em Angola temos exatamente absorver também diferente.
So I might have to get you to repeat after everyone's got their headsets on.
If we're ready.
Yeah.
You'll have to translate it to me.
Okay. Sorry, if you could say again.
Nós passamos por uma fase embrionária que é maior. Estamos a falar acerca das cadeias produtivas, por exemplo, que é exatamente essa necessidade de agregarmos a agricultura para fomentarmos a agricultura a partir da indústria.
Yeah, the translators can't hear her, so there's no way to translate.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have a translating issue.
Yeah.
Anybody help with
Is anyone
Yeah,
bilingual
know
enough to
Portuguese.
do the translation for us?
Portuguese.
Portuguese.
So
She said we should switch off.
Okay, we'll take it off the line.
Well, maybe we have to. Sorry, we don't have the translating capability. Was there another question from the audience? Yeah.
So yeah, that's a good question, the involvement of people going forward. I guess it would depend on the company, the segment, the product you're making. There are definitely companies out there that are looking into ways, can they develop a lights out factory, so no human involvement at all. Automated guided vehicles to move the materials around, a digital line so that you'll know when downtime's going to come. So there's definitely companies thinking about it. It would be, I think that's often the future. I think most companies are trying to get the basics still right. I mean, we mentioned there's still a big gap there for a lot of companies, so it's really more the advanced ones that are looking at it, but it's definitely something that companies are looking into. How can we take humans out of this? Because, as was mentioned a couple times, there's a big talent gap for a lot of manufacturing companies, not just food, beverage ones, but across all of manufacturing. So how, dealing with that, technology can help eliminate the need for people in some processes. So there's definitely companies looking for that.
Okay, we have time for one more intervention from the audience, if there is one. If not, I'll maybe just take the last question and ask you all to sort of give a sort of a 30-second response. We've talked a lot about the supply side, so what farmers might do or what manufacturers might do. What about the demand side? What do consumers want? What are the consumer trends that are really going to change this industry over the next decade? Let's see if we just move along the panel.
I guess I look at it, again, from a perspective of the smallholder farmer across Africa. Land holding is perhaps 2 acres, 3 acres.
Maybe so the 30-second rule.
Yeah, just over a hectare. And for them, it's actually the availability of simple technologies. And I'm looking at them as the consumer.
Okay.
And what we've seen is, access to these simple technologies and the supply chains that go with it. Triple incomes, massive improvement in health. They're the ones who become the new consumers with some relatively simple technologies.
Okay. Joachim, what consumer trends do you see?
Yeah. Just allow me 1 second to come back on the supply side with one few words, and then I speak about the demand side. Okay. It's important to understand where you come to operate when you come to operate in Africa. In terms of supplies, there are, yes, I understand my friend from GE, the advanced technology mentioned there. However, operating in our part of the world, there are some basic fundamentals. Utilities. You operate in places where power supply is erratic. It's a reality. Water supply is not available. So you have to fix the basics. We speak about generators. We speak about borehole yet. These are the basics that we have to understand and fixing before moving to the advanced level of technology.
Okay.
There's a huge business opportunity there too.
Yes, definitely. Now, coming back to the demand, remember in my introductory words, I was speaking about understanding the consumer where you operate. So you don't bring your recipe from west of the world to east of the world. It doesn't work. You have to observe that mommy, understand what she's putting in the dish that she has every evening for the family, and try to replicate that for her in a packaged form. Every African family eats spices. Up to now, the spices, the red chili is crushed at home. What we intend is to brand it and properly pack that to make it available for the mommy. Salt, the seasoning I spoke about is garlic powder, onion powder, ginger powder, etc., etc. But make it processed food, packed, branded, such as the mommy, who now is an employed person, don't have time anymore to crush this product.
So in countries where there's more female entry into the labour market.
So do understand what are the requirements of the consumer in that part of the world.
Okay.
Then try to provide what he or she wants for her dish.
Yeah.
It's important.
Right. So looking at local dishes and exactly what they need.
Definitely.
Reid, how about yourself?
Yeah, so I mean, locally it matters. It depends on what segment within food beverage you're operating in. I think the nutrition point is one that's constant. Low calorie, no calorie options, organic food, non-GMO are constant ones that we hear from, what the consumer side is demanding. But I think the major point is that's what they're demanding now. In 1 year, 5 years, who knows what it's going to be. Consumer demands change rapidly, and it's going to be the companies that are agile in their operations that are going to be able to take advantage of it as it changes. So I think that's one important point to keep in mind.
Do any of the consumers ask for nutrition?
They definitely do, and especially, so I saw a recent survey that said only 12% trust national and local brands with the product information they provide, and about 40% said they would switch to another brand if they had more product information provided to them.
Okay. Gunther, your final thoughts?
3 points. First point is, I think consumers want convenience. They want food that is easy to prepare and food that is healthy at the same time. So healthy, convenience food, I think, is one aspect. Second, we had an international conference in FAO on sustainable food systems for healthy diets, and we had there students around the world. And from all over the world, students that came to that conference said, we don't want to lose our traditional foods. We want a food system that also takes into account culture and the customs that we have. That was a really interesting point, and I think we don't want a mono food culture. We want really regional diversity, and consumers want regional diversity that respects their culture. Thirdly, there is a public sector issue, which is the nutrition issue, and the cost around malnutrition are so high that maybe some countries will not be able to afford free consumer choice. And there may be food-based dietary guidelines that need to be linked more to national policies to make sure that the food that is also healthy food is available for consumers to choose.
Okay, and finally, Navas.
Yeah, world over, dual income and families are increasing. So it obviously will lead to disposable incomes. So convenience in food is going to be a big thing in the future. So let's all put money and chase the food.
Right, dual income families is a big trend. Okay, thank you very much. Thanks to my panel, and thank you to the audience for your engagement. The next sessions start in about 7 minutes at 3 o'clock. So depending which one you want to go to, you have to find might be here or in the main auditorium. So check the program. But in the meantime, please do join me in thanking all my panelists.